Je vais me lancer en anglais pour accueillir nos invités européens. So we have the pleasure to welcome Federico Savini. He's associate professor in environmental planning, institutions and politics at the University of Amsterdam. He combines approaches of political sociology, urban planning and critical geography with the study of institutions and socio-spatial changes in cities. Currently, he is coordinating an international funded project about degrowth and circular economy. He is also founder and coordinator of the Post-Growth City Coalition. You can find a website about it. It's a community of degrowth scholars in Europe and Netherlands. He is curator of the master studio Future Cities and also co-initiator of a social housing cooperative, the Urbaine in Amsterdam. And recently, he co-edited this publication, Post-Growth Planning, Cities Beyond the Market Economy, at Routledge Publishing. Then we also have tonight invited David Fanfani, or David or Davide, I don't know. David. So he is associate professor in urban technique and planning in the Department of Architecture in the University of Firenze in Italy. He teaches territorial design and analysis of territory and settlements. He lectures in the master degree course in territorial planning and design. Now, since 2019, he has been scientific director of a journal of urbanism and design called Context, Cities, Territories, Projects, also at the Department of Architecture in University of Firenze. He develops research and activities particularly on multifunctional agricultural parks and local energy planning. More generally, also on shared participatory planning, design tools for local development, land regeneration, settlement resilience. And recently, he published 2 volumes here of bioregional planning and design in Springer Publishing. So we will start for half an hour of presentation of each of you, and then we will have the possibility to debate together and of course with the audience. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Victoria, and Bénédicte for inviting me here. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to give an introduction, very brief introduction to the word and the theme of degrowth in cities. And I'm going to tell you why thinking about cities and regions for degrowth today is very important. Secondly, I'm going to give you an example of one of the many possible spaces that are important to carry out and to realize this vision of degrowth in cities. And this example is from my second hometown, Amsterdam, where I work and live. So, when we talk about degrowth, we reject 3 myths of the contemporary mainstream economics. The first of these myths is that economic growth is good for society, always, and it's always good for personal well-being. That's the first myth that degrowth rejects explicitly. The second is that economic growth can be decoupled from environmental degradation. So the increase of GDP can be separated from the destruction of the environment and the increase in emissions. That's the second myth that degrowth rejects. And the third is that economic growth is actually necessary to achieve climate targets. Basically, this is the myth, again, that we need to push more and more the economy in order to generate the money and the resources to pay for sustainability. That's the third myth that degrowth rejects. Why degrowth rejects these three myths. If we look at the situation of the planet and the relation between our economy and the planet today, we see that we have no indication of an improvement in terms of environmental conditions or sustainability. We do know that current sustainability approaches, the mainstream one, are not effective. They are not delivering in terms of climate targets. This image shows you the relation between the global GDP, the gross domestic product, all the economy basically in the planet, and the emissions of CO2 and the material footprint. Now, if you look at the emissions, you could say that what we're doing right now is actually okay, or let's say it's doing something good. It's slowing down the ratio of emissions, even though this slowing down is definitely not enough for the speed and scale necessary to halt climate breakdown. But when we look at the material footprint, I think this is more important for urban planning and urban design. We see that there is no indication of decoupling between economic growth and the material demands that are necessary for our economy. Now, for those who don't know, the material footprint is basically all the stuff that we take out of the planet to make other stuff. This jacket, this table, this microphone, this building. That's what the material footprint measures, all the stuff that we extract to build cities and houses and infrastructures. Now, this image that I showed you before, it's very different than the targets that we need to achieve to solve the climate crisis. Actually, the UN chief has said that we are heading to a highway to climate hell. It is true that the reduction of emissions, and let alone the reduction of ecological footprint, it's definitely not compatible with the speed and scale that we need to do right now. In this image that is from the IPCC report, the latest published, we see that we are heading to 4 to 5 degrees by the end of the century, which is a pretty catastrophic situation. And that's why degrowth proposes a very different method of achieving sustainability. Now, degrowth is not a project of technological innovation, or rather is not putting technology at the center of its program. Degrowth is a project of social ecological justice. In fact, when we look at the responsibility of different income groups in emitting CO2 and also, by the way, material footprint, we see that this responsibility is not equally distributed. In this image on the left, you see in different regions of the world the relation between CO2 emissions and income groups. If you take Europe, you see that the top 10% richest people in Europe emit 6 times more than the bottom 50%. If you take North America, this image is much worse. The wealthier emit a lot more than the poorer 50%. Interesting, also in East Asia, which includes China today, we see that the wealthy top 10% emits almost 20 times more than the bottom 50%. So when I talk about degrowth, I'm talking about the degrowth of the rich, not of the poor people. Okay, if we think about degrowth of everybody, we get the yellow vests, something that in France you know very well, because there was a program of sustainability that tackled everybody, not the rich, but everybody. If you look at the right image, you see also how worse this inequality has become. This image shows you that in the last 30 years, the top 1%, the richest 1% of the planet has increased, exponentially the amount of CO2 emissions. While actually we see in this image that the middle classes, the middle high classes, have actually decreased a bit their emissions. This is due to the fact that there was some sort of green consciousness or green consumerism happening in middle high classes that decided to become vegetarian, decided to fly less, to take more the train. They could afford to do that, and therefore in that sector emissions a bit decreased. But what is important here is the disproportional increase of emissions by the top 1%. Now, just to be precise, not that the top 1% richest people eat 1 million more hamburgers than normal people. It's not that. They, of course, increase emissions by their investments. Investments in fossil fuels, in real estate, in infrastructures, in chemical industries, investments in destructive forms of production, like extensive and intensive agriculture, etc., etc. That's why they emit more. Now, as I said, one of the myths that degrowth debunks is that economic growth is good for the well-being of people. Now, we actually, if we look at data, we see also that in fact, with GDP growth, the life satisfaction doesn't increase linearly. So it's not that more GDP always makes people more happy. There is a point in which this happiness, this satisfaction, decreases or flattens and actually decreases. And this is particularly clear in city regions. In this image, you see the curve. You see that up to a certain middle average income, some city regions of Europe have less life satisfaction. The extreme case is Brussels and Paris. Why Brussels and Paris are so unhappy? It's because they're very rich. Paris is one of the richest cities in Europe, and because with this extreme wealth, we have also extreme social polarization, social conflicts. We have poor areas and rich areas. We have sprawl. Brussels, it's a sprawling city where people are unhappy because they have to take the train every day, 1 hour, or take the car 1 hour to go to work. Actually, the interesting thing is that the cities that are the happiest in Europe, so the part on top, are usually regions in Germany or Scandinavian countries, where in fact cities are to a certain degree understood as more livable. Anyway, we can discuss a lot about this, but what I wanted to show you is that economic growth for cities, it's not always and undoubtedly good. Now, given these premises, what is degrowth? Or rather, what does degrowth want? Degrowth wants a socio-political transformation, so it's not a technological one, primarily, that does two things. The first is to downscale in a planned way all activities that are environmentally harmful and socially alienating, starting from those that are less necessary for the well-being of humans and the environment. This less necessary is very important. We are talking about reducing sectors of the economy that are not essential for the well-being of people. The most common example given is private jets. Who needs private jets? The other common example is SUVs. Who needs SUVs? Okay? Normal people don't. The second thing that degrowth does is that it achieves a planned increase of all activities that regenerate the ecosystem and improve social well-being, starting from the fulfilling of basic needs. And here again, basic needs is essential. We are talking about basic services to the well-being of people. Schools, hospitals, good quality green areas, healthy food, public transport. Did I say schools? Yes. So this is just an example of the essential needs that degrowth wants to increase by decreasing what is not necessary. It's quite a redistribution, I would say. Now, cities are crucial for sustainability and degrowth. Why? Because the way we have planned and designed cities today, until today, was only geared to push for economic growth. In fact, we know that the wealth of nations, it's made through cities. The wealth of France is made through Paris, Lyon, Bordeaux, I guess. I say Paris first because it's one of the dominant regions. The wealth of Holland is made with Amsterdam, Rotterdam. The wealth of Italy, Milan, Rome. These are cities that attract capital. In fact, the top 600 cities of the world hold 2/3 of all the global wealth. So very few cities hold much of the wealth. By the way, these few cities and all few cities of the world, while covering only 2% of the whole planet's surface, they also consume 75% of all the materials. So we are actually pumping materials, energy, water to relatively dense urban environment. This comes at cost also of what is non-urban. What is non-urban is considered as of less value. Areas for mining, areas for agriculture, the what in Italy we call internal areas, the peripheries where students need to migrate to cities in order to find jobs, places that are shrinking, urban shrinkage areas. These areas are considered secondary, unfortunately, to the wealth of nations. And that's what our model of planning has made in the last 50 years. By the way, this book shows just one of the many books that praise the wealth of nations through cities. And, I mean, you know probably this Edward Glaser. If you don't know him, you just check him on YouTube. It's fun. Now, as I said, current sustainability has three main limitations that we need to address from a degrowth perspective. And I'm going to give you these examples. The first is this. The way we are planning sustainable city regions today, it's by shifting the costs of the green transition to other areas of the planet. If CO2 emissions decrease in Amsterdam, in Lille, in Paris, in Brussels, it's because we are increasing the material footprint, the impact of that economy somewhere else. This is just an example of what the green smart economy does to areas of extraction. Cobalt mines, lithium mines, I will show you in a second, e-waste dumps, coal mines, sand mines, mines of any kind. I can list you forever. That's the first problem. We're pushing out of cities the stuff that we don't want or the costs of this transition. The second is that even if we have a green economy or a smart economy, we have an economy that requires land and materials. This is obvious, so obvious that I feel stupid saying it, but I need to say it. So the economy of the smart cities requires batteries. The sustainable economy of the renewable energies requires materials, rare materials. And these rare materials are extremely rare. It's called rare material, not for any reason. And actually, there are economic projections that show that we can't even fulfill the projection of transition to renewable energy so easily. Lithium will be exponentially more demanded than today. We have projection to 400 to 600% more lithium just in 10 years, in 20 years' time. And paradoxically, even if we will cover all the surface of cities, so 2% of the planet, with solar panels, we might be able to cover only 2% of all the energy that those cities use. So what I'm saying is that solar panels are good, are great, don't misunderstand me. But we cannot think about a renewable energy system without thinking about the demand of energy. So if we continue grow demand, we will also need more space, more footprint for producing renewable energy. And that's why, for example, one of the big discussions in my country a few months ago was whether to build a huge data center for Google, because that would take up to 10% all the wind energy produced by Holland to make data centers. And the only justification for that is economic growth. The fact that economic growth is needed for blah, 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 being happy, finding, climate targets, etc., etc. Okay? Now, the third problem of sustainability approaches today, the mainstream one, is that they invest always in areas where there are high values, high rent gaps to be captured. Rent gaps, I mean, where you can capitalize on the increase of real estate value. In fact, the neighborhoods of cities that tend to be praised as the greenest and the cleanest, those with the least CO2, those with less cars, more bikes, etc., are neighborhoods that are often very wealthy, located in the center of cities where there are gentrification trajectories. This is on the left is a central neighborhood in Amsterdam, considered one of the most pedestrianized neighborhoods of the city. On the right, you see a famous project that every architect knows. In Milan, which is this bush on a building, and that is located in an area which is gentrifying very rapidly in the center of Milan. So what I'm saying is that we should not continue with our idea of a sustainable and green economy of cities that grows, but we need to question the actual way cities grow in order to find a degrowth trajectory for sustainability. And how do cities grow? And here I'm giving you a bit of context on how we can solve that process. And when I'm talking about growth, I'm talking really about finding a complete different model of urbanization, a very different model. Now, there are three processes that today characterize the growth of cities. The first is that we tend to spatialize the economies of cities and urban areas. Basically, we concentrate the finance in Amsterdam, we concentrate the finance in London, we concentrate the TV industry in Rome, we concentrate the chemical industry in the Ruhrgebiet, in Cologne, in Düsseldorf. We concentrate the universities in cities. We make specific sectors to find what we economists call agglomeration economies. Now, what this does, what the consequence of this is that cities become dependent on global flows of resources. This is just an example of a spatialized economy in the Netherlands. Production of food for export. This is how we produce food in the Netherlands. This is a city. It's not obviously agriculture. It's a city for food. And it is basically a whole part of the country that is working only and exclusively around one economic sector. If there is a crisis of that economic sector, that sector will collapse. We will have unemployment, we'll have people who have no jobs, people who have no houses, etc., etc. That's why the growth cities is unstable. The second thing, the second process is that we focus a lot on private land values. So this aspect of private property as a way to invest in sustainability is something extremely problematic. And this system has made cities dependent on growth. If I talk to a mayor of a city, I'm sure also the mayor of Lille, and I would say, you have to degrowth, they will say, you're crazy. If I stop growing, I cannot pay for the metro, I cannot pay for the tram, I cannot pay for the schools. I need the growth to get money. And to get more money, I can invest in a high-end real estate, in skyscrapers, in stuff that creates more returns. This is a vicious cycle that never stops. And the problem comes when cities don't do this. They become shrinkage cities, the ugly cities, where people live. That's the problem. This system has created a dynamic that is very problematic. And the third process that we have today in the growth of cities is that, yes, they are sustainable, but what we have is that it's a simulation of nature. So we paint buildings with trees, we put birds on buildings, we make them circular to get some water out, we isolate them, blah, blah, blah. So basically, we make cities some sort of, artificial spaces where natural processes exist. But what happens if we don't have any more the means, the money, the people to maintain those processes, we get these cities, this nature will die. We know it from the many buildings like this that have no trees on it, just to give you an example. Now, what we need is an urban degrowth. And urban degrowth is a system of different policies that are radically rethinking these three processes that I just explained. Now, I'm not going to give you the whole thing now. There is a lot of reflection going on, and there is no one single plan, just to be clear. You can find some insight in this book, which was already introduced, and there is much more there. But I'm going to give you, for the theme of today, which is the bioregion, I'm going to give you one reflection on how bioregionalism and urban-rural relations can work for rethinking the growth of cities. Now, in one of my work, I claim that we need to start planning cities for habitability. Now, the word habitability doesn't mean livability. Livability is something that we used for a long time, and it's referring mostly to human-centric type of understanding of life. City is livable if there is a good accessibility. It's livable if you have good jobs. It's livable if you have schools. That's the problem. I think we need to move towards a conception of quality of cities that includes properties that are not exclusively human. So if you take the word of habitability seriously, you can see this is the definition. The habitability is the capacity of a particular space to support the activity of an organism. That is, to provide the set of resources and conditions required for its way of life. Now, this definition comes from the geosciences. And they actually explain that in a habitat, it's something that allows creatures, in this case organisms, to survive. Now, who can survive in a city? I mean, cities are made for our brains and our wallets. But in terms of food, bacteria, clean air, stuff that makes our bodies function, cities are a disaster. They are death zones. I mean, just to be a bit provocative. Just a bit. Especially the center of cities. So, in fact, I claim for a form of planning that nurture a regenerative relation between humans and their ecosystem. And this is important, that promotes a consciousness of the relation between the social and the ecological. And we need to use urban design, urban planning as a tool to create this consciousness, to make urban inhabitants understand that nature, food, land, soil quality, water quality, air quality are essential resources for their well-being. Okay? And that's where the bioregion, I think, comes into play, in my own understanding. And I'm going to give you just one example of a project in the city of Amsterdam that is trying to struggle to advance this new model of planning. Now, I'm talking about this area here. This is called the Lutkemeer polder, which is like this. It's a 200 hectares of land located just at the border of the municipality of Amsterdam. And this is the last agricultural land of the city. So the city, it's all covered. And the only last agricultural land of the city, it's right here. And the problem of this land is that it's near the airport of Schiphol and near the harbor of Amsterdam. Okay, the fourth harbor of Europe. So this area has two values. On the one hand, the municipality, the region, the airport, which is the state, by the way, public airport owned by the state, sees that as a potential economic location for the most sustainable logistic hub of the city. They want to build industrial logistics there. However, that area is one of those that have the highest social, ecological, and historical value in the city. This is just a classic poldering system of the Netherlands. It's a clay soil, extremely fertile, and it's also a water retention area. very low. It's 4 meters, almost below sea level. I mean, the entire city is 2 meters. This is really a hole. So it is a polder. That's why it's called polder. And therefore has a different value there, not economic. And there it's where I think in these areas we can rethink the way cities, or let's say experiment with how cities grow and how they can generate this different relation between urban and rural environment. Now, to do that, it's an active work by planners, designers, and governments. It doesn't happen just to keep these areas free. So this area is now becoming the site of a strong contestation between two fronts. On the one end, we have the global logistics. This is one of the plans. And this is, by the way, circular, smart, green, and painted with bushes on the buildings. This is the plan of this company developing this logistic firm. However, on the other hand, we have communities which wants to form a community land trust to actually create a whole environment around agroecology and the agricultural commons there. And these two groups are conflicting each other. So this space is becoming a frontier for habitability in the city. And here you see one of the actions. There are literally people getting stuck there in order to protect this area every day. There are lawsuits and all kinds of things. Now, my point here, just to make it short and I'm done, is that we need to find these spaces in city where to produce these urban-rural relations. And these relations need to be designed, planned. They need to be actively pursued, not left passive. Thank you for listening to me. If you want to know more about the theme of degrowth and cities, you can visit this website. There is a library there, and there are also faces of people that work on this topic. And it was made to show that there is more and more work to do, and there is already some thinking done. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, especially because I have the opportunity to meet your activities here in Lille and to meet you, and also the research field of Federico, that is very interesting for me, despite the fact we are both Italian, but I've never met him, and it was really a pleasure to know about his activity and about the manifold relationship that his work, very interesting work, can present and ignite also my activity. This afternoon I try to respect the time, even though I'm not so well organized as Federico, and I'm going to present in my relationship, in my speech, which are the main points that feature the bi-regional approach for re-inhabiting according co-evolutionary recovery between communities and places. Then how this kind of approach can foster and reframe also spatial and social-spatial patterns of reimagining and our approach to inhabiting the places and region, and then how this kind of activity is also strongly related, how well pointed out Federico, to a complete reframing of our economics approach and about the networks and the supply chains that our way to live and build cities entails. First of all, just to point out how talking about regions it is not so new in our approach to regional design and to planning and spatial approach to the city model, because there are manifold contribution that relates to the economic geography and to sustainability, to creation of aspects related to specific issues like food, energy, and manufacturing, that speaks about how the regional dimension and the territorial long history endowment of places matter in order to help to appraise and understand the development trajectories of each part of the world. Federico quoted the idea that the wealth of the nation depends on cities, and Jane Jacobs, for instance, many years ago wrote a book with this title called "Cities and the Wealth of a Nation," explaining how the richness and the reason of the development of a specific context depends on the relationship between the city and the surrounding region, not only in terms of environmental qualities, but also in terms of history and capacity to develop endogenous forces to feed a specific resilience and identity. We talking about bioregionalism, we drawn on a long history. I'll try to be very fast in this, but the reframing of the city, of the quality of a specific urban environment in the context of geographic and historical also region, drawn back to on the contribution, for instance, of Patrick Geddes, that we consider one of the founding fathers of planning, of the method of planning, but also in terms of the conceiving the planning activities as a relationship between the living being and the natural and the anthropogenic dimension. So it is very important in this contribution underline how the city is strongly as to be strongly based on the not only human ecology but also a complex of social ecological elements. This kind of legacy then passed by the relationship between Patrick Geddes and Lewis Mumford in the history of one of the main reference for us in conceiving bioregionalism, that is the activity of the Regional Planning Association of America in the first decades of the last century, where some very outstanding activists and professionals and researchers like Lewis Mumford, Benton McKay particularly, set up the key elements in terms of the relationship between urban and rural and surrounding region relationship, referring to the role of a more balanced relationship in reframing the city between ecological matters, energy, and streams flows, and the growing dimension of the city. They probably pointed out these issues because, firstly, the big urban agglomeration in the east coast of the United States experimented the problems related to the not controlled urban expansion and growth. This kind of heritage strongly affected the relationship to the origins and the development of the bioregional movements. that since from the 70s they developed especially in the ecological domain, coping with the ecological crisis, especially defined and pointed out by some founding contribution, like the one of Rachel Carson in Silent Springs, and in recommended to cope with the growing threat deriving of the social-industrial development and especially human-centered development economic model. In this kind of approach, nevertheless, the environmental determinism is refused towards strengthening of an active inhabitants' role and of their ability to re-inhabit places according to a new place awareness. So it is central in bioregionalism, this aspect of the responsibility and ability of inhabitants to develop stewardship practices and the way to relation to the living and not living environment of these places. So in these terms, connection between places, politics and ecology became pivotal above in the Peter Berg and Gary Snyder contribution. Particularly, Peter Berg in 1973 founded the one of the more important agency and tools to diffuse the idea of the bioregionalism by creating the journal Planet Drum and Association Planet Drum Foundation. Even though strongly referred to empowering of ecological dimension and stewardship dimension of the settlements, the biregional legacy is very pluralist and featured with many voices, according to Eberly, but can be referred to some key points that are able to encompass these different voices and approach carried on by many kind of people, actors, poets, philosophers, planners, and so on, activists. These key points refer especially in the concept of life in place, to meet the life needs and its pleasure according with the place features, re-inhabitation, so relearn to live in an area disrupted and damaged by humans' activities, and they conceive of the bioregion not as a determined geographical spaces, but as a complex entity featured also with not only with the geographical elements, but also with the role of the habitants that develop a consciousness of the territory. And it is very important because it refers especially to a sense creation of sense of belonging to places. Especially some elements are helpful in this heritage. For instance, referring to Kirkpatrick Sale book Dwellers in the Land, where he pointed out some key elements that are some guiding principle to bioregionalism approach, and that can now, in more recent terms, refer to coping with each issue at the appropriate scale. In terms of economics, pursue a self-reliance and regional cooperation. In terms of policy, support subsidiarity and bottom-up approach and self-government. And in terms of society, feeds multiculturality, self-help relation, and I add as well solidarity between different places, context. So that means that bioregionalism is not regional social closure, but it's an approach that keep together people that have care and take practices of stewardship of places in such a way that everyone that come in a places and take care of it can be welcome to this kind of to this kind of approach. In fact, there are, for instance, some contribution that talks about bioregional cosmopolitan bioregionalism. That means solidarity between different bioregions. To sum up this principle, bioregional principle refers to place stewardship, adopt a fitting scale of action to build up balanced and fair communities and local development, bioregional fairness, that means democratic governance and committed with the local control support to high quality life and social justice, bioregional economy, that means, well pointed out Federico, conceive development in endogenous way, local regulation and appropriate technology based on self-reliance and consumption as much as possible in terms of import replacing process activation according to Jacobs. Then political autonomy and economical interdependence and cooperation between bioregions, and that can mean to pursue new form of institutionalized government level in a bottom-up dimension. Finally, bioregional planning encompasses the urban dimension that is conceived as integrated with the ecosystem reproduction principle, for instance, urban metabolism and green urbanism. This kind of approach find out a key principle, reference principle in the concept of coevolution. Coevolution is very important in our approach to bioregionalism because means to try to appraise the relationship between society, environmental, technology, and social organization, driven on not extractive and only human-centered approach to planning. In this kind of approach, we find out some important reference, for instance, in some economists, environmental economists like Richard Norgard, that related the loss of coevolution with the starting of the fossil fuel regime and economics starting from the 18th century. Or in a more heuristic approach, the importance of the coevolution as is interpreted by some environmental scientists as a social ecological system that allow to explain and understand transition and process according different scales of time and place, and how it support the idea of the bottom-up actions also in opposition to global processes and to global condition. This kind of, moreover, this kind of approach also allow to explain how we can try to trigger some counter process of settlement organization by starting with niche and little initiatives. This legacy was also somehow referred to new problems by the approach of Alberto Magnaghi, concept of urban bioregion that try to underline and stress this coevolutionary approach between man and humankind and environment, nature and culture, interpreting the territory as a living system of high complexity that interpretate and refer to the long-lasting history of a territory as creating a sort of genetic gen code that can guide the settlement choices and planning, and producing what we call a patrimony, a territorial heritage, as a living endowment that can at the same time regulate rules and be a products of the process of the inhabiting and living. This is an approach that a sort of eco-anthropocentric approach that refuses the determinism of environmentalism, and it is open to different possible solutions of development, an approach that the human geographer of the 19th century called possibilist. In terms of spatial elements, the urban bioregion refers to the necessity to reframe urban patterns according to balanced polycentric system of middle-sized center. The regional settlement and territory conceived as a common result of a co-evolutionary relationship between humans and ecosystem, a sort of neo-ecosystem. The founding and regulatory role of the built environment and the conceived living heritage, and the pursuit of self-reliant development, self-sustainable, sometimes called that, drawing on a wise and regenerative use of resources and city and land cooperation, and to produce local productive system. Like we have some little example in Italy, for instance, referring to the flexible industrial models of production and industrial districts, and the practices of community development and stewardship, and initiative for bottom-up governance reframing. Now I am going to try to very fast to present some example referring to this approach, where we worked at the university with research activity, but also try to translate this kind of approach in some little practical and real initiatives in sort of research action practices. This is one research referring to agricultural park as new tool for planning that we carried on some years ago, starting from the central Tuscany settlement system, hypothesizing Tuscany green earth for the central settlement system, mainly based on the role of the resulting central earth green core and connected to the surrounding valley and little river getting in the main river Arno. And in this sort of research we propose a city countryside pact to foster a polycentric settlement pattern, regenerating the ecological framework, and through containing and downsizing settlement ecological footprints, supporting proximity economies, especially referred food system, energy renewable sources, water recycling, and water reuse. Set out integrated policies and projects at the regional and urban scale, food planning, agricultural parks, riverine area enhancement agreements, multipurpose ecological networks, and finally supporting a deliberative and participative approach in planning, especially drawing on the Tuscany law that support somehow the participative construction of planning tools. Here we can see the studies that we use to support this kind of activity, the representation of the territorial patrimony, the definition of the different regional settlement patterns, the evaluation of the ecological footprint of this area that is very, very high, how Federico refers. Here we have, at the moment in the central area, a coefficient of ecological footprint over 5 points, over 5. That means in the metro area of Florence we need 5 metro area of Florence to feed to have enough resources for their inhabitants. And we propose some different scenarios, especially the city countryside agreement that was aimed to reconstruct a multifunctional peri-urban agricultural area. These are other studies in this big ellipse, urban ellipse. Here is referred to the Nevole Valley between Lucca and Pistoia. These are some details. And in the cross scale, according to a cross scale approach, starting from the big area to some different and detailed project, like in this case of a river park, and enhancing the tourist system to reevaluate a diffuse legacy in terms of historical endowment and natural as well endowments. And this is another case of bi-regional reframing of planning, where three little municipalities that currently are at the periphery of two bigger towns like Pistoia and Prato can, referring to the little sub-basin of their territory, can become a new city according to a bioregional approach by strengthening their relationship and complementarity and the quality of the environmental areas. And this is the representation of these three municipalities, Agliana, Montale and Montemurlo, little municipality that, referring to the river that runs through their territory, are able to reconstruct their history, their territorial heritage, and define a strategic scenario that transform their periphericity in a centrality, a new centrality, and through the reinforcing the complementarity, and with the design of a master plan that is mainly based on the role of the river and the riverine areas. That it is important to underline that in the recent flood that struck this area could be, once they would have been created, they could have been played a role of mitigation of this catastrophe that instead happened during the last month. This is other design elements. Another elements is the regional park of the agricultural park of the metro area in Florence, a very important park of over 7,000 hectares that is formally approved by Tuscany region but not developed so far. That was created with the participative process and then finally resulted in formally approved park with more 7,000 hectares with 8 municipalities committed and with a strategic design plan and with main goals to, when it was formally approved, that goals that mainly refers to the provision of ecosystem services like stormwater and flood control, land take control, recovery and enhancement of agricultural food system for food production, fostering an improvement of biodiversity and reduction and control of greenhouse gas emissions, and the creation of the diversification of an attractive and recreational touristic area to enlarge the attraction of Florence that is really to not sustainable at the moment. This project was not well integrated starting from the outset. It was a problem for this implementation so far. The park anyway was object of some initiatives with a stepwise process with different peri-urban projects carried on by the different municipality, with public calls for the realization of structural facilities, and especially with some studies that were carried on with by a Interreg project called Peri-Urban Parks, and finally with some activities triggered and carried on by associations or groups of citizens, associated and activists. But since now, up to now, the park is not formally endowed with a strategic development project and not with a management entity. These are other elements for the park support. Just to underline that finally, during this week, we are in the way to define finally an agreements between university and Tuscany region to define finally a study to set up a management body of the park, and moreover a strategic development agri-urban plan. To support this kind of activity, we also detailed the project of plan with some project integrated system that encompasses farming activity, heritage elements, agroecological networks, and so on. And the representation of the park as a new, also huge touristic and proximity tourism service entity. And in this kind of approach, result of very important the creation of endogenous economies that refers especially to the principle of the self-reliance, as stated by Molly Scott Cato, and especially to the principle of economic re-embedding of economic initiatives by shortening the long-haul networks of provision of energy, matter, and other goods for the city, and that well fit with the bioregional approach, especially in the contribution of the Molly Scott Cato book, and also drawing on the idea of Carlo Polani that refers to the disembedding of the economics from the society and from the territory. Here in this approach we have some representation, reflection. This one on behalf of Robert Tyre, who is an important bioregionalist in the United States, that refers to the reduction of long supply chain in the world by reinforcing the regional and bioregional cooperation with the reduction of waste and less consumption of the fossil fuel sources, and the creation of circular economies at a different scale of the settlement and of the regions. And this refers especially to some key new economics and endogenously based, like energy, tourism, the improvement of urban-rural interface, and food production, especially food productions, and the transition to our sustainable local productive system. Here I'm going very fast because probably I'm well beyond my time, and this is a feasibility study that Magnaghi and other researchers carried on for the province of Prato, by showing how it is possible to tap into renewable ecological and source energy system, also referring only to the endogenous energy basins, referring to biomass production extracted in a sustainable way, to a solar panel placed only on the roof of the industrial settlements, and the use also of water power. With these studies, results that the energy source can feed not all the demand, obviously, that correctly has to be reduced, but can feed a meaningful part of the demand, up from the 1/3 to the half of the local demand. And it shows how it is possible to reduce our ecological footprint by a wise use of local resources. The city countryside pact that we developed especially by studying the local food supply system at the park, peri-urban park level, and that show how also by adopting agroecological measure we can strongly enhance the economic value of production and feed some important ecosystem services like pollination, like food production, and like CO2 storage, and at the same time by increasing the economic value of this kind of production and as well of the agroecological capital like soil fertility reproduction. And here this slide refers to the necessity to redefine new cooperative entities and multi-level planning and design tools by putting together rural development measures and planning tools, and in a way to develop also public money funding in more effective results, like in the application on the ecological focused area provided by agricultural policy of the Europe. And finally, in this kind of integrated approach, lastly, Tuscany region funded a specific territorial project that territorialized the funding of the political agricultural policy, referring specifically to the agricultural park of the plain, and where we also defined and proposed a specific action for based on the improvement of the local cereals production by creating a short food supply chain that started from the idea to create a fair economy, for starting from a fair price paid to farmers for the wheat production, and according to a selective regional closure that refers to that refers to the extractive commodities wheat market by defining fair prices for the farmers and defining a final price of the bread, and redistributing the values along the chain. This kind of initiative totally bi-regionally inspired, and that still function after 10 years, and it is a way to maintain agriculture presence in this area, without which it was impossible only to imagine an agricultural park. This is some data about the growth of the activity, and I'm finishing. Sorry, just to explain the cross scale of our approach method. Here we try to show how This kind of approach, referring to different recreation of agroecological patterns, the polycentricity, the enhancement of local supply chain, refers to the redefinition in the case of the municipality of Prato to its role itself of the different neighborhood, conceived as sort of eco neighborhood that try to, at the proper scale, to reconstruct the sort of circularity, at least at the maximum level achieved at that scale. So this is the scenario that refers to the entire municipality territory, and here we are an example of a local old village that is reframed according to this principle with its own agricultural area that can feed at least a part of food, only a part obviously, the use of renewable energy in some part of this old settlement, the recreation of a centrality drawing on slow mobility and connection with the services, and so in a sort of a polycentric element that is part of a wider urban system, and that can be used also in institutional planning tools to define some requirements, also in quantitative and prestational terms, for the urban plan. Thank you for attention, and sorry for my long speech.
Thank you very much, of course, for this very documented presentations, very clear and I would say open-minded and committed to positions. For me, it's quite complementary with what we had last week in Saint-Priel. We had the National Days of the Network for Ecology in architectural schools, and so then we saw a lot of spatial achievement on specific points, but I think here we had the opportunity to have really theoretically backing frameworks from both of you to place that realizations on the framework. So it's very important for us to have also this approach. Maybe I think I will have one question for each of you, and after try to open the debate between you, the dialogue. Just so maybe first questions to better maybe understand really the specificities. I wanted, I think, to ask for Federico. You really strongly show the link between urban development, which is a motor for economical growth, and also how much urban development needs economical growth, for example, to finance the public services. But of course, the goal is to fight the economical growth because it produces crisis, environmental crisis. So I think I would like to understand better if your hypothesis is we could begin by breaking, disconnecting this link between the urban and the economical development. And is that for prevent economical actors to take advantage of the urban development, but letting development possible in some places, for example, maybe considering that growth is not development, it can be transformation or other thing. Or is that really to target also a general urban degrowth, like physical sense, like going like to shrinking cities, and then well, it's not a contradiction with the sustainable models about capacity, and what about also the externalities? You spoke about all that the other territories that have consequences other side in the world. So maybe a more concrete example that you gave, how far acting at the scale of what we saw in the south of Amsterdam, how can that have an impact on those external, the outside territories like Nederlander, Coastal?
It's clear, yes, thank you. Let me answer, I think there are 2 or 3 questions there. No, it's okay. I want to be very, very, very clear. Degrowth is not shrinkage. Shrinkage is an economic recession. It's what happens when we have an urban system that is dominated by growth, and then that doesn't work. That's what happens, shrinkage. Degrowth is a different form of development of cities. So to say that, I would basically summarize it as simple as this. Cities can develop in a way that is fully directed to the well-being of the majority of the people and the well-being of the ecosystem. If we do this as a priority, we might avoid spending money in a useless way in projects of economic development that do not bring returns to the collective well-being. I give you an example. Amsterdam has a financial district, the South Axis. To build that financial district, to attract the global economy, Amsterdam has pumped, and the government, the national government of the country has pumped 4 billion euros there to build the infrastructure, to build the skyscrapers, to make it livable for the people afterwards, because it was ugly, it was just business. The return on that development is, however, much lower than the money spent by the government. The idea was that that development would bring value to the population of the city, but actually that development hosts companies, multinational companies, that do not even pay taxes in the Netherlands. So the return is not for the people living there. Let me give you another example. The city of Amsterdam, together with the national government, has funded billions of euros to expand the airport of Amsterdam, Schiphol. That airport has 70% connecting flights. 70% of the flights are not of people staying in the Netherlands. They just go there and fly somewhere else. They bring no value, and those 70% bring no value to the city. It has been demonstrated that actually the 30,000 jobs of the airport of Amsterdam now can be, in fact, replaced to other sectors of the economy that bring value to the city. So the development should be explicitly oriented to social, ecological well-being, not to economic growth for social, ecological well-being. So I will go directly to the core. What we need is social, ecological well-being. So then, of course, some developers, some economic actors will be interested. If you build hospitals, if you take care of what we call the sharing economy of mobility, if you take care of parks, if you have community-supported agriculture, if you produce good food, if you are a management company that deals with responsible tourism, all these activities are very important. If you do education, art, culture, care in general, this is economic activities. And let me add, these economic activities employ people, not machines. So in fact, they bring employment too. The fact is that the economy of cities should be, I think, prioritizing those activities rather than just thinking that this is the result of economic growth. So that's why I don't think it's economically, I think degrowth is economically very viable. Actually, it's achieving full employment, more jobs, less automation perhaps. That's I think, an economy that can be also more polycentric, looking at the bioregion. I hope I explained a bit the vision.
Yeah. There was another part of the question that is more special for architects or urbanists about the form. It's also the form of the city changing. What about metropolis? What about the Randstad? What about Flemish diffuse city? Is that kind of organization compatible with do we have to go to, or can we do the change, economical change that you are describing without changing the form of the city?
I think it's very very interesting. What is the urban form of the growth? So we do know that density is extremely important. Living dense, it's more sustainable. I think that's to a certain degree approved by now. So it is not an anti-urban story. However, what we see is that extremely dense cities like Paris, Tokyo, London, they're also ecologically unsustainable, but not because they're dense, just because the people live there, flying more, eat less good food, they have bigger cars and bigger apartments. That's why they are unsustainable. It's not the density. Now, the question is what type of density we want. So there are different forms of density. I think here, the polycentric vision, where you have centers connected with each other through public transportation that share essential services that cannot be fully decentralized. Think about specialized healthcare, like you cannot put, you cannot have a, heart operation in every single small village. You need specialized healthcare, or, so in that sense, you can share that service within a system. But I think that going back and revaluing the vision of, the polycentric city, to a certain degree, the architecture of the garden city of tomorrow, which is not tomorrow anymore, the bioregion. I mean, these are interesting ways to, as I said, combine a good relationship between the urban space and the non-urban space. And that can be done, in fact, through polycentric development.
Thank you. There was a question in the audience, but is it a question for David, or otherwise I will...
No, you can go. You can ask your
just
question.
one, and then I
no
give you the floor.
Sure.
Just to understand also more for a bit about the bioregion. I was wondering how well, the question maybe is how do we start with such a project? It's like a kind of territorial project, but very specific in my understanding, for more than being, for example, agricultural stuff. But there are two dimensions that for me are very present in the literature, maybe not so emphasized in the presentation, but I think for everybody, bioregion has a link with the cultural and the idea of a community involved. And you spoke about a sense of belonging and the importance of, yes, the coincidence of the inhabitants and this economy, local economy. And also a second fact for me is very present in all the literature of bioregion. It's something about turning to the past with regenerating, return to heritage, patrimony, and so reterritorialisation. There is always that So how do you do when? How can we do when we are in a place that has never had such a history, or because all the examples are in Italy that have a very strong patrimony of less local production, and so we understand that for a local population, it's quite a richness to build himself, the sense of belonging, etc. But there is a lot of territories that have not that history. I was talking about cross-border territory, for example. We have to build everything, and so is the sense of belonging so important? That's one question, because the community, if we go a bit too far, we have some the communitarian excessiveness, for example, and also what can we build on well, if there is no past or no patrimony or no heritage to build that bioregion.
Thank you.
it is a good question. This morning, having a lunch together with Federico, we spoke about because effectively, for for a European in general, it's easier than speak about and to refers to a long history to some, especially in some part of Italy, Europe and Italy, where the memory of this legacy, especially the relationship between urban and rural, is not so far in terms of time. And but there are some elements, and I didn't speak about the recreation of community relationship and solidarity and cooperation, because it is very, I guess, not. It is a very rather difficult topics, because as you well pointed, we risk to refers to even not intentionally to refers to some process of closure and self-feeding identity and so on. And but I guess referring to this matter, I think that place stewardship and the community purpose to recreate some positive relationship and care of the place where we live can fit some sound relationship, even though in a stepwise mode, in order to detach somehow our role of consumers that are totally abstract from the territory to the new and creating a new evaluated interpersonal, even though not so properly communitarian relationship. I observed this kind of process, for instance, in the creation of the with short food supply chain, because this kind of activity allowed a new relationship between the farmers that are newly recognized in a public discourse that completely forgot about this in an industrial town, the role of this person that look after the most part of the municipal territory somehow. And with the consumers that by buying this kind of product acquired and the new awareness about the presence of these territories in this place that otherwise was completely forgotten. Somehow then say, oh, you produce bread with the wheat of ground, but where you cultivated it? Because some of them didn't know this place. So through the territoriality, it is possible to create solidarity relationship even where they have not a long history, I guess. Obviously, I am aware that operate in Prato or in Florence or in Tuscany is rather different than operate in Amsterdam or in New York. But I guess sometime the challenge is higher is the challenge, higher is the capacity of people to adopt smart and innovative approach to solve some problem. Because for instance, the creation of food councils happened not in Italy but in Toronto, in Canada. So I guess we look at some American and big town experience as a model sometimes, no? So it's important, I guess. Because humans have a lot of resources, sometimes that we are not able to imagine it.
Other questions?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I have a question, which is probably read a lot, but quite central to degrowth, at least to my understanding. Transformation processes often are guided by quite some technological optimism, by this idea that technological advancement might solve it for us. And from what I understand from degrowth is that it tries to break free from it. So how can we break free from this idea that more efficiency will do the job, that new technologies will do the job? And maybe a sub-question, what role do you see for new technologies in degrowth? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. I agree. So we're not, I mean, the current approaches are not only techno-optimists, they are techno-fetishists. They actually think that technology does things. You build it and then voila. No, I think technology is a tool, and if we use technology for the well-being as a priority and for ecological regeneration as a priority, then we will look for technologies that help us doing that. Again, to have the metaphor of the heart operation, we want the best technologies for repairing our organs. We want the best technologies for repairing our ecosystems. We need research for that. But we don't want the technologies that instead destroy our ecosystem, that have been produced in order to maximize the yields and maximize and accelerate the returns on agricultural investments, like fertilizers. These are the technologies we don't want. So we do need technologies within degrowth, but they are oriented to regeneration and well-being. Now, the question comes, this is obvious, can we expect Microsoft or these big companies to do these technologies for us? Because they don't have that interest, Or can we expect the industry of weapons to do that for us? Well, obviously not. That's not their interest, right? So in fact, within degrowth, there is this discussion about the ownership of technologies, open source systems, bottom-up forms of technological innovation, and the need of a distributed system of knowledge, where every locality from Prato to Amsterdam can access basic algorithms, basic data that allows these people to share knowledge. So we need a democratization of the industry of technology. And I think that's an essential political question. And that political question applies also to bioregionalism, applies to real estate development, because in fact, I think we need to go and talk about property of land and the financial system that sustain this approach to urbanization. Is that an answer?
Thank you.
Other questions from you? Maybe, yeah.
While some other think about questions about the spatial elements of the bioregional transition, because even though it's easier to think about the recreation of some of urban villages in a small-sized or medium-sized town, probably is much more difficult in metropolitan context. So, in my opinion, according to the stepwise model that we have that I aim to adopt with the bioregional approach, I guess we have to construct some composition of the metropolitan form, trying to recreate how referred also Federico to the importance of public space for people, also to recreate a new conception of public space, not governed by corporate and only consumers approach, but for spaces where people can meet, where they can feel to be part of a community and a shared space. And this kind of approach based on recreational centrality, public space, new relationship between this public space with the green space, also if small in urban context, can be a guide to progressively reconstruct some multi-centered patterns also in huge urban context. I have in mind, for instance, I visited New Delhi. New Delhi is, in origin, is created by many parts of many cities that combined in a world urban system. And I guess we can try to rethink in polycentric terms also metropolitan systems to reduce somehow our ecological footprint. Obviously, without thinking about total local satisfaction of needs, but it is part of the bi-regional approach to think about in terms of hope and possibility to solve at the proper scale some problems, obviously without in a progressive and incremental way, not otherwise if we think to the system we have to face with, we obviously we have not hope.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I just have a question about the vicious cycle of finance you talked about for cities, because we once studied the example of Freiburg in Germany, which is always like depicted as the green city, the best of all, whatever. But it actually is also facing this problem where they, for instance, they had to build a new hotel, or they built a new hotel that was super green and ecological, but that actually displaced socially disadvantaged people from the place before. And I wanted to ask, how do you envision the concrete steps in order to break the cycle of financing and having to look for funds for cities?
Yes, the concrete steps, yes. So Freiburg, I mean, it's a very interesting case because one of the first, in fact, 20 years ago even, there was question from a point of view of green gentrification, the Bolban area. So it is a very interesting case to look at. A colleague of mine, Samuel Mosner, wrote a lot about it.
It's with him that we studied.
Yeah, okay. So he's great. I know him very well. These projects are everywhere nowadays, right? So it has become a complete mainstream, and I think it's problematic. Now, but I understand why cities do that. So because of this vicious cycle of funding. So how would I address that? Point one, I will look at all the projects where we spend a lot of money and we don't get as many money as we expect to do. So all those projects that are literally wasted money. And there are some of those in large cities where in fact we build an industrial park or a business park and there is vacancy, 20-30% vacancy, and where we see that the quality of space is decaying, people don't go there, they become marginal places. This is places where we waste money, and this usually interests some industrial areas but also some commercial areas that become dead zones because shops leave and it's simply not working. So I would start looking at how these areas can be completely rethought. Now you would say, oh, we need investments for that too, right? Yeah, but actually, if you look at the creativity of the community living in these areas, you don't need so many investments. The case that I showed you is precisely one of those cases where the community land trust that wants to organize the management of that area can do it at very low cost. They actually raised 500,000 euros that would be enough for them to start. But no, the city is investing 40-50 million euros because they think that the return in the long run is better. So that's one of the first things I would do. The second thing I would do, it was definitely make a plan for the underused and vacant spaces and try to rethink those completely from the bottom up in terms of reuse for the communities where we live. And if this involves expropriation, I would also expropriate those spaces because they are common goods. And I'm talking about underused cultural spaces, but also underused land that for years has been there for speculators to wait. And so I think that could be another way to do it. And eventually, I would just make a strategic plan for degrowth. First thing. Second, third thing. Or maybe this is the first. The strategic plan of degrowth. The city of Amsterdam has tried to do that with the donut city plan. They actually made a planning. They did it too fast and very quick, so it didn't turn out to be so great. And now they're having problems. But having a strategic plan for degrowth, so thinking in terms of areas for well-being, thinking in terms of ecological regeneration, thinking in terms of redistribution of housing space and housing programs, not for speculation but for use, housing co-ops, etc., etc. Having a plan that kind of gives a meaning to all these activities will already, be a step. But eventually, what we need, politicians, what we need is a plan to actually convince people, not convince, make them visible that the degrowth is not a recession. It's a different way to live in a city, and to do that, we do need a plan. We need plans like the one that David showed of the parks and the responsible tourism. These plans help visualizing what could be in a city. So I would rather stop talking about what is degrowth and why and do a plan for it. Yes.
Just to remind how this economics vision that Federico well exposed means also to create endogenous economies that allow for a multiplier of well-being, and not only over well-being but also of the revenues inside the local systems. Otherwise, the most part of the revenues are leaked out of the system. This is very important because to shorten the chain of production, for instance, it was clear in the food system, allow to maintain in the local territory, in the regional or sub-regional system, richness and revenues that otherwise would be leaked out.
Can I just add one thing? I think also important. I have a whole list of possible, but I want to give you just more examples. No, I mean, one simple example. In Amsterdam, 10% of the total city budget comes in through parking taxation. That's a way, in fact, to tax and reduce mobility, and it's making money. It's not losing money. Another thing we should do, and I don't know why in the Netherlands it exists, is to tax underuse of space. So I don't understand. I don't know how it's in France or Lille actually. I'm curious to know. But in Holland, if you are an homeowner, you pay the same percentage of real estate tax than anybody else. It's in Amsterdam is 0.5% of your cadastral value. It's not very high. But a person living in 50 square meters with two people pays the same percentage of a person living alone in 400 square meters. How crazy is that? I mean, why not de-taxing people who live small because often they're poorer, they live small because they're poorer, and increasing the tax on real estate on people who have too much space, excluding social housing. Okay, social housing we excluded, fine. But I mean, this is a policy that makes clear one thing, that abusing of space in a planetary situation where 8 billion people want to live in cities and where we don't have land, I think it's unethical. So we should disincentivize underuse of space. And this also goes on top of disincentivize home ownership for speculation. So people who have 2 or 3 or 4 or 200,000 houses. I mean, 200,000 houses in Berlin, they just voted to expropriate people who have more than 3,000 houses, and they're owners of 300,000 houses. So yeah, this kind of stuff. Yeah.
I wanted to, well, maybe you were just starting already answering a bit to that interrogation that I had, but I would like to go maybe a little further about, yes, continuing how do we do concretely. I wanted to make the observation that there is some contrast between in both presentations between the scales of the realizations of what we can see and the scale of public planning or I would take an example of for the maps that you show for an agricultural park. Spontaneously, we have an impression of a very sophisticated, technical, complex work. Those images are a lot of details, and it's hard to imagine that was built by bottom up, by participants. The scale of the examples that you gave of the farmer and the local food, and are those maps really bottom up built in the sense of there is the chain for agriculture and the chain of energy and all that local chain, filière, wood, etc. Are they putting them together and finally give that map? It is built like that by layers and finally it's a bioregion, or there is, like you said, your third point, there is a big scale of planning, like Amsterdam or a region and public actors that draw it or ask to technicians, architects to draw it, or is complementary.
Thank you for your questions. No, these maps are not bottom-up produced. Clearly, these maps are a result of rather detailed and full relationship between us as a researcher and the local context.
Researchers draw.
Yeah, because we conceive our role as, for the most part, also as research in action. Because we are not physicians, chemists that will work in a laboratory. Our laboratory is the territory, and otherwise, I think it makes no sense for us to produce ideas or theories without coping with the reality and the real context where we propose where our ideas refers. And so these maps are at the cross between the knowledge of the territory, the immersion of the territory, and aimed to feed the dialogue between actors and also inhabitants. In fact, in this context, there are some rather living society that spontaneously produce some kind of innovative and retro innovation initiative. They were called by rural sociologists, and we have only to try to put together all these kind of initiatives and actors, trying to create a vision that can guide and stimulate, ignite new reflection, new action, and also at the same time support people, making them feel that are not alone, that are working together in a context that can produce new networks, new relationship, new form of economy. Personally, I go directly to the farmers markets, and I explain to the producer, oh, I'm David, I work for the agricultural park, I work for this project. And over the year, this kind of activity produces mutual trust, but also mutual initiatives, because the wheat chain is also a result of our knowledge, but by the capacity of these people to imagine a completely new role, social role of their economic activity. most of them abandoned the work, other works, in manufacturing, in industrial activities, in service activities, and they are not originally farmers, sometimes son of farmers or daughter of farmers, but they conceive a totally change of their life, imagine, even though they are some, I guess, some kind of heroes, because working inside a city and carried on an organic farm in the urban fabric is not really easy to do that.
Maybe I was thinking you have questions for each other.
No, I wanted to talk about this planning
Oh.
question.
Yes, please.
I think, yes. I think it's very important. So, what type of what approach to planning we need to radically rethink our city regions? So, I think we should learn from the best cases of strategic planning of the early, since the 90s, when basically the plans were not made top down anymore at one point, in the best cases, but they were built on this platform of different public administrations that were relatively knowledgeable of the different developments in their own jurisdictions, and together they tried to frame many of these developments within a general vision. I think it's a bottom-up form of planning that I think we can learn from. And of course, there are cases, good cases and bad cases of it, but I think it is very important to not think in terms of hyper-localism. So we do need regional planning, and we do definitely need a return back of national planning too, I think, because that's what takes care of the major energy grids and the land management. So there is the fact is that the nation state will come back, for sure, because the crisis will get worse, and nation states will come back, as they did with the COVID, as they will do with the climate crisis. So I think it's good to be a bit prepared and earlier, but I think they will come back. So it's time for national planning again.
Maybe just if you have one question for each other, but
I'm curious, but we can also talk at dinner, about this. But I have 1,000 questions for them.
I have cross question just to end. Do you think, David, that degrowth is necessary to create a bioregion? And Federico, do you think bioregion is a good way, but you already to respond to the need of degrowth? Just to cross.
Hopefully the answer is quick, because I totally think that degrowth is very interesting operational paradigm and theoretical paradigm, how well showed Federico, and I'm very interesting, and this is the occasion. This occasion is very interesting and important for me, because I hope it created the condition for further collaborate and exchange with Federico, because his approach is very interesting, and how he well explained that the growth is not necessarily physical or spatial, but is a really more complex approach. So totally positive, and thank you for the invitation that gave me this opportunity.
Thank you. I also think that it was clear for me that I think we should, as degrow urban scholars, we really need to do our homework and get updated on the long history of bioregionalism and bioregionalist research and practice, because I really think that in the last 30, 40 years we've been obsessed with cities, dense urban environments of the smart economy, and we forgot that there is a lot of beautiful innovative practices in the spaces between cities, like the one you showed us. I think there is a lot to learn for urban scholars and also urban policymakers, and bring at the center these spaces. I think it's urgency.
In this approach, we shared, for instance, the idea, the importance of agroecological urbanism, and how well deepened by Chiara Tornaghi and Michael Dayen. I guess that for us is a common important approach to rebalance and reframe the relationship between a rural and urban, conceived no more as only a tool for capitalist economic reproduction.
We are trying to divide them also.
Yes, we are trying now.
So, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you. Et on se retrouve en 2024 avec notre prochain cycle de conférences qui sera cette fois sur un autre grand axe de la chaire, accueillir. Là, c'était transformer. Et peut-être plus tard, il y aura aussi mobiliser et peut-être décarboner. Mais pour l'instant, on va aller vers accueillir. Donc voilà, merci beaucoup à tout le monde et merci encore.